The first thing Alexander heard was his mother trying to breathe. The second was a nurse asking whether she had ever reacted badly to medication. And the third was a voice he had spent 8 years teaching himself not to remember. "Bring her into 3, now," the doctor said, calm enough to cut through panic without raising her volume. Alexander turned from the admissions desk and saw Maya walking beside the stretcher, one hand steadying the oxygen mask while the other reviewed the emergency chart. She looked older, only in the way earned confidence makes a person seem more complete, yet the sight of her still struck him with the force of an unfinished sentence. Before she reached the treatment room, her eyes met his for one controlled second, and something cold moved beneath her professional composure. Then she looked back at Eleanor and said, "Mrs. Hayes, stay with me, because I need to know exactly what you took tonight." Eleanor lifted one trembling hand toward her throat, while the monitor began chirping faster, and Alexander stepped forward before a nurse blocked him gently with an arm. "She was fine at dinner," he said, hearing the uselessness in his own voice. Maya asked what had been served, what prescriptions Eleanor used, and whether anyone had offered her a supplement, an herbal drink, or a new medication during the charity gala. Alexander remembered a crystal glass his mother had accepted from a hospital trustee, but he could not recall what was inside it. Maya ordered antihistamines, steroids, cardiac monitoring, and toxicology screening with a precision that left no room for hesitation, although she never once looked at him again. When Eleanor's blood pressure dropped suddenly, Maya leaned close and told her, "You are not leaving this room tonight, and neither am I." The crisis lasted 11 minutes. Although Alexander would later remember it as a single unbearable stretch of fluorescent light and restrained motion. By the time Eleanor's breathing eased, Maya had already ruled out a heart attack and begun testing for an acute drug interaction rather than simple exhaustion. She stepped into the hallway after the nurses transferred Eleanor to observation, then handed Alexander a sealed plastic bag containing a silver pill case found in his mother's evening purse. "This was open when she arrived," Maya said. "Do you know what belongs in the empty compartment?" Alexander examined the case and recognized the engraved initials his father had commissioned years earlier, but one of the small squares was empty and lightly stained blue. He told her his mother never carried loose pills, and Maya's expression tightened almost imperceptibly. Then someone needs to explain how an unprescribed sedative entered her system. The question should have frightened him because of his mother, yet another fear moved underneath it, older and more personal. 8 years earlier, Maya had vanished from his life after sending one final message that said only, "I need time," and his father had insisted she had chosen medical school over their future. Alexander had waited 3 days, then left Atlanta for New York, and buried himself inside the company until success became a respectable form of avoidance. Now the woman he believed had abandoned him was standing 10 feet away, holding evidence that someone might have tampered with Eleanor's medication. "You will need to speak with hospital security," Maya continued, "and you should not discuss the toxicology result with anyone from the gala until we know more." Alexander asked whether she thought his mother had been targeted, but Maya answered with medical restraint rather than reassurance. "I think assumptions are dangerous, and missing facts are worse." Near dawn, Eleanor woke long enough to recognize Maya, and the relief on her face carried a familiarity Alexander did not understand. "You came," she whispered. Maya lowered the bedrail and adjusted the blanket around her shoulders. "I was already here," she replied, but Eleanor shook her head faintly. "No, I mean after all these years." Alexander felt the room change, because his mother had always claimed she barely knew Maya beyond a few polite dinners. Maya's gaze shifted toward him, then returned to Eleanor with a warning softness. "You need rest, Mrs. Hayes." Eleanor closed her eyes, yet her fingers remained wrapped around Maya's wrist, as though holding on to someone she had once failed. When Maya gently freed herself, a folded corner of old blue paper slipped from Eleanor's purse and landed beneath the chair. Alexander bent to retrieve it, but Maya reached the paper first and froze before touching it. Only 3 words were visible along the torn edge, written in handwriting he recognized from another life. "Dear Alexander, I..." Maya placed the fragment inside the evidence bag with the pill case, her face losing color for the first time that night. "Where did that come from?" he asked. She did not answer immediately, and the silence between them no longer felt like an old wound, but the opening of something deliberate. Finally, she said, "Your mother may know more about both of these things than she is ready to tell us." Then she sealed the bag, called security, and walked away before Alexander could ask why a piece of a letter addressed to him had been hidden in Eleanor's purse for 8 years. Maya found Alexander outside the cardiac observation unit 20 minutes later, with the evidence bag visible through the security office window. He asked whether the handwriting belonged to her, and she told him the hospital investigation could not become a private conversation simply because they shared a past. "That paper was addressed to me," he said, keeping his voice low. Maya studied him with an exhaustion that had nothing to do with her overnight shift, then asked the question he should have expected. "Did you ever wonder why the woman who supposedly left you wrote a letter instead of calling?" Alexander said he had never received any letter, and the disbelief that crossed her face was brief but devastating. Before she could respond, a security officer approached with preliminary footage from the gala, showing Eleanor accepting a small blue capsule from Richard Vail, the Hospital Foundation chairman and a longtime advisor to the Hayes family. Richard appeared on the recording beside Eleanor's table, smiling as he placed the capsule near her water glass and gestured toward his own chest, as though recommending something for indigestion. The image contradicted his claim that he had never approached Eleanor after dinner. Richard had managed several of his father's charitable accounts and still advised the Hayes Foundation. Maya requested the gala's medical station log because Richard had claimed the capsule came from a volunteer nurse, while security contacted the event organizers before anyone could alter the records. Alexander offered to call Richard directly, but Maya stopped him with a look. If he lied once, warning him only gives him time to prepare a better lie. Her answer sounded less like anger than experience. Eleanor became fully alert before noon, although she refused to explain the paper fragment until Maya confirmed that her breathing had stabilized. When Alexander placed the evidence photograph beside her bed, Eleanor looked toward the window. She admitted Richard had offered her something he called a natural calming supplement after she complained of dizziness, but she had taken it only because he said her physician approved it. Then Alexander showed her the photograph of the blue paper, and the careful dignity she had maintained all morning began to fracture. "I found that piece last week," she said. "It was inside one of your father's old foundation ledgers." Maya remained near the door, arms relaxed at her sides, yet Alexander saw her shoulders stiffen. Eleanor confessed that the handwriting had frightened her, because she remembered a sealed envelope arriving at the family office shortly before Alexander left Atlanta. Her husband had claimed the envelope contained only a request for money after their breakup. Eleanor had accepted the lie because challenging him carried consequences, although she now understood that fear had made her complicit. After his death, she avoided the locked cabinets in his study until a foundation audit forced her to review old financial records, where she discovered the torn corner pressed between pages connected to Richard. "I brought it to the gala because I intended to ask him what he knew," she whispered. "Before I could, he saw it in my purse and told me I looked unwell." The timing suggested an attempt to silence her, and Alexander gripped the bedrail as anger rose. Maya reminded him that suspicion still required proof, although her own eyes had darkened. The hospital's legal director reported that the gala station had distributed no blue capsules, while residue matched a sedative dangerous with Eleanor's heart medication. Richard's name also appeared on the access list for the hospital pharmacy's executive storage cabinet, a privilege granted through his foundation role. Maya said the evidence did not establish intent, but it justified contacting police and suspending his access. Eleanor agreed to give a formal statement, despite knowing the investigation could expose the Hayes family publicly. Alexander expected her to ask him to protect the company's name, as his father always had, but she surprised him by saying, "A reputation that survives only because people stay silent deserves to collapse." Maya looked at her with the first trace of warmth Alexander had seen. After the officers left, Alexander followed Maya into the quiet garden corridor and asked what the original letter had contained. She said the letter was not a romantic plea, nor an apology for choosing medicine, but an explanation that his father had offered to fund her mother's surgery if Maya ended the relationship and disappeared. Maya had refused, then written to Alexander, because she believed they should confront his father together. "I waited at the community center for 3 nights," she said, her voice steady, despite the memory beneath it. "When you never came, I assumed your silence was your decision." Alexander told her his father had shown him a message supposedly from Maya, saying she needed time and wanted no contact. The message had been manufactured, the letter intercepted, and 2 young people had mistaken manipulation for rejection. Before Alexander could apologize, Maya's pager sounded, and she stepped away after saying, "Do not turn this into a love story yet, because someone drugged your mother to keep an old secret buried." Alexander stayed at the hospital, although Maya made clear that proximity would not earn access to her time. He sat with Eleanor while detectives reviewed Richard's finances, exposing another layer of his father's control. Richard had approved payments from the family foundation to a private records company during the same month Maya's letter disappeared, then authorized a transfer to a clinic treating Maya's mother under a false donor name. Clinic records showed the surgery had been paid for, but not as an act of mercy. The money came from an account Alexander's father used to settle private problems without traceable connections. Eleanor stared at the documents, seeing generosity revealed as leverage disguised as charity. Maya returned near dusk, and Alexander shared the findings only after asking whether she wanted to know. She listened without interrupting, then said her mother had believed an anonymous church fund covered the operation. For years, Maya had thanked strangers while the man who separated them purchased the appearance of kindness. Alexander expected rage, but Maya's response was colder. "He made my mother's survival part of a transaction I never agreed to," she said. "Then he let both of us believe we had been saved by grace." Alexander apologized, yet Maya refused to let guilt become another performance centered on the Hayes family. She told Eleanor that remorse mattered only when it changed what a person was willing to risk. The risk arrived next morning, when Richard's attorney threatened to expose confidential donations unless Eleanor withdrew her statement. The threat was delivered through a private message containing photographs of old foundation ledgers, including pages that appeared to document illegal payments to hospital officials. If authentic, the records could damage St. Gabriel and implicate Maya because one payment dated to her residency placement. Richard implied her position had been purchased, although Maya had earned it through national matching. Alexander offered to have his corporate attorneys bury the accusation before it reached the press, but Maya rejected the offer immediately. "The last time your family controlled the truth to protect me, it cost 8 years, she said. "You do not get to protect me by hiding evidence." Maya reported the threat and requested an independent review of her hiring, placing her reputation under scrutiny. Eleanor agreed to release the entire foundation archive, while Alexander authorized forensic access to servers his board had resisted opening for years. The decision triggered an emergency meeting where executives warned that investors would punish any admission of inherited misconduct. Alexander joined by video and heard trusted executives urge selective disclosure. He asked whether anyone cared who had been harmed, and their silence answered him. "Then we are not discussing how to protect the company," he said. "We are deciding whether it deserves to survive unchanged." The forensic review uncovered that the payment linked to Maya's residency was not a bribe for her appointment, but a donation Richard had redirected after her acceptance to create the appearance of influence. Someone had altered the ledger description years later, preparing a weapon that could be used if Maya ever challenged the foundation. Server logs showed Richard had searched Maya's name, Eleanor's records, and the locked correspondence account 3 days before the gala. The sedative, torn letter and threat served one purpose. Eleanor's discovery could reveal how Richard profited from buried secrets. Detectives obtained a warrant for his office, but Richard disappeared before they arrived. That evening, Maya left the hospital through the employee garage and noticed a dark sedan idling near the exit, its headlights off despite the rain. She called security and moved toward the staffed ambulance bay instead of her car. The sedan pulled away before officers reached it, but a traffic camera captured part of the license plate. Alexander learned about the incident from Eleanor and arrived at the security office furious, asking why Maya had not called him. She met his anger without flinching and said, "Because you are not my bodyguard, and fear does not restore the rights you lost." He apologized at once, then asked what she actually needed. Maya considered him for several seconds before answering. "I need you to tell the truth, even if it destroys the version of your father you have spent your life defending." Alexander returned, carrying Samuel's photograph and the server report. He admitted wanting to call his father misguided rather than cruel, because condemnation threatened the life built in his image. Eleanor took his hand and said the sentence she had been avoiding since the ambulance arrived. "Your father loved ownership more than he loved people, and I taught you to call that strength because I was afraid." Across the hallway, Maya stood unseen beside the half-open door, having returned with Eleanor's discharge instructions. She heard Alexander answer, "Then I have to become someone he would never have understood." And for the first time, she believed his regret might be turning into a choice. Eleanor left under police protection, while Maya returned to a schedule allowing no private collapse. She completed rounds and reassured families, yet the dark sedan remained at the edge of every thought. Compliance reassigned her from foundation programs during the review, although gossip outran official explanations. By noon, cropped ledger pages online accused Maya of building her career through Hayes family favors. Reporters gathered before anyone confirmed authenticity. Maya read the headline once, locked her phone, and entered the room of a teenage patient whose biopsy results had just arrived. At Hayes Global, advisors urged Alexander to issue a narrow denial, protecting the company without naming Maya. He refused, because silence framed as caution had already destroyed enough. At a live press conference, he confirmed manipulated records, cleared Maya of improper assistance, and announced an independent audit. When a reporter asked whether his statement was motivated by a former romantic relationship, Alexander answered without rehearsed charm, "It is motivated by documents, harmed people, and my responsibility for an institution that benefited from secrecy." The stock fell, 2 directors resigned, and attorneys warned the admission could cost him control. Maya saw the conference after finishing with her patient and felt no gratitude strong enough to erase the past. What moved her was his absence of self-protection, because he never called himself a victim. He had accepted responsibility for what happened under the name he inherited, even when the market punished him for it. Still, she sent no message, knowing courage could be followed by convenient retreat. Instead, she met investigators and identified her handwriting on several archived copies of the original letter, which Richard's office scanner had recorded before the envelope disappeared. The scan included only the first page, ending before Maya described the meeting place where she would wait for Alexander. Someone had deliberately preserved enough to control the story while destroying the portion that could reunite them. The breakthrough came from Samuel, who remembered that Maya had written the letter at the community center using an old typewriter for the envelope label because rain had damaged her pen. The center had closed, but Samuel had stored its receipts, logs, and tapes in a church basement. One tape showed Richard arriving after Samuel handed the envelope to a courier from the Hayes office, then leaving with the same envelope tucked beneath his coat. Another recording captured Maya waiting near the entrance on 3 consecutive evenings, long after the building had emptied. The footage could not restore the years they lost, but it proved the silence had been manufactured. Detectives also found Richard's handwritten note on a visitor log. "AH must leave before she speaks." Police traced the sedan to Richard's shell organization, while the driver claimed he was hired only to frighten Maya. He provided the address of a vacant Foundation lake house. Officers found Richard there with boxes of records, passports, cash, and medication taken from the hospital cabinet. A draft statement accused Maya of blackmail if Eleanor died or withdrew testimony. Richard was arrested without resistance, yet he insisted he had protected the Hayes family from scandal for decades. He claimed Alexander's father had taught him that truth was merely another asset, valuable only when controlled by the right person. The statement reached Alexander during an emergency board vote that could remove him as chief executive. Alexander released the audit and asked the board to judge his next actions, not inherited innocence. He proposed returning misused foundation funds, compensating affected families, and transferring oversight to an independent public trust. Some directors accused him of sacrificing the company, while others recognized concealment as the greater danger. The vote ended with Alexander retaining his position by 1 seat, largely because younger executives and employee representatives supported the reforms. He did not celebrate, because survival was not redemption, and authority gained through a narrow vote could disappear at the first sign of weakness. His first instruction was to publish the archive without removing documents embarrassing to his family. That evening, Maya found him helping Samuel move recovered books in the hospital garden. Alexander explained that the audit would continue even if he lost the company later, then asked whether the public accusations had harmed her work. Maya admitted that 2 families had requested different physicians, while dozens of colleagues had defended her before the review concluded. "The truth does not prevent damage," she said. "It only tells us which damage belongs to us." Alexander nodded and offered no apology designed to secure forgiveness. He simply told her the original footage would remain sealed unless she wanted it released, because proof of her pain did not belong to the public. Maya looked at him differently then, recognizing that he had finally learned the difference between revealing truth and owning someone else's story. The review cleared Maya 3 weeks later, but no statement erased families' doubts or colleagues' whispers. She declined interviews and returned to patients with the consistency that built her career before anyone knew her history. She agreed to lead a new ethics committee only after securing equal votes for nurses, social workers, and patient advocates. Alexander attended only when invited, and his name appeared nowhere when pediatric grants moved into the independent trust. Repairing harm required surrendering control over how repair was seen. Eleanor began volunteering at the hospital twice each week, not as a wealthy patron, but as an assistant in the family resource room. She made coffee, organized forms, and listened to caregivers who could not miss another workday. Some recognized her, others knew Eleanor as the woman carrying chargers and remembering bus routes. Maya watched without offering easy absolution, because kindness after exposure could still be driven by shame. Months later, Eleanor gave Maya her testimony, recovered records, and a waiver allowing publication. "I cannot return what my silence cost you," she said. "I can stop using my comfort as a reason for someone else to remain unprotected." Maya accepted the folder, not the expected apology. Explaining forgiveness could not be demanded or purchased. Eleanor nodded, tears gathering without becoming a performance, and said she would continue, whether Maya forgave her or not. That answer mattered more than any promise, because it separated change from reward. Eleanor then helped establish emergency housing, using money recovered from Richard's hidden assets. Community organizations received oversight, while affected families defined how funds would be used. Maya eventually joined one planning session, not because the past was resolved, but because the future deserved competent hands. Alexander's Tuesday visits continued through a federal inquiry, shareholder lawsuit, and division sales funding restitution. He approached Maya only when invited, and their exchanges slowly grew from greetings into conversations about books, policy, and children's courage. One evening, Caleb refused treatment because he feared classmates would mock his hair loss. Alexander tried reassurance and failed, then admitted that adults often pretend bravery means feeling no fear because they are embarrassed by helplessness. Maya watched from the doorway as he told Caleb, "Courage is choosing what matters, while fear is still sitting beside you." Caleb agreed to meet a recovered patient, and Maya saw Alexander speaking from vulnerability rather than authority. After the children left, Maya asked whether he still wanted to change the day he left Atlanta. Alexander said he no longer trusted repairing one moment while ignoring who they had become. He wished he had questioned his father, trusted Maya, and refused the convenient story offered to him. but he also knew regret could become another way of worshiping the past. "I cannot ask the younger versions of us to save who we are now," he said. "That work belongs to us." Maya looked down at the blue notebook, where Caleb had written his first treatment goal beside a drawing of a lion with uneven hair. She warned that growth did not guarantee a second chance, and he said she owed none. Their first meal together happened, without declaration, after a storm closed several roads and trapped staff, volunteers, and families inside the hospital overnight. Maya found Alexander in the cafeteria, divided boxed dinners among parents who had missed the last shuttle, then joined him at a corner table because every other seat was taken. They shared ordinary stories from the lost years, including Maya's awful apartment and Alexander's abandoned piano lessons. Laughter arrived cautiously, followed by silence that no longer demanded explanation. When power returned, Alexander walked Maya to the employee entrance, but stopped before the rain. "May I call you sometime when there is no emergency, investigation, or board vote?" he asked. Maya smiled, then wrote her number on the final blank page of his borrowed book, instead of giving him an answer aloud. The next morning, however, Samuel called Maya before sunrise and asked her to come to the community center's former storage room. Renovators had found a metal box behind a damaged wall containing correspondence Richard believed destroyed. Inside was Maya's complete letter, still sealed beneath his father's private office stamp. Beside it lay a short note in Eleanor's handwriting from 8 years earlier. "Please give this to my son before he leaves." Maya stared at the words, because Eleanor had always claimed she never touched the letter. The discovery did not merely reopen the past. It suggested that the woman now rebuilding her life had hidden one final truth from both of them, and that trust might still break under the weight of what remained unsaid. Maya brought the letter to Eleanor's apartment, while Alexander waited downstairs until she understood what his mother had concealed. Eleanor recognized the note immediately and sat without defending herself. 8 years earlier, she found Maya's envelope after overhearing an argument about Alexander's departure, then wrote an instruction demanding delivery. Richard intercepted it, and Eleanor learned the truth when she saw the returned office stamp. Her husband warned that exposure would end the medical funding, remove Alexander from the company, and cut Eleanor off financially. She hid the envelope, promising retrieval after surgery, but fear hardened into a silence she no longer knew how to confess. Maya listened, although each explanation burdened the younger woman who had waited alone. "You were threatened," she said finally, "but I was the one who paid for your safety." Eleanor accepted the judgment and did not ask to be understood. She explained that the gala fragment came from Richard's photocopy, and she confronted him before confessing what survived. Taking the capsule came from a habit of mistaking Richard's control for care. "I am not asking you to forgive the woman I was," Eleanor said. "I am asking you not to let my cowardice become another secret that protects me." Maya opened the apartment door and invited Alexander upstairs. He read Eleanor's note, but refused to open Maya's sealed letter. "It belonged to the man I was supposed to be 8 years ago," he said. "Opening it now would turn her pain into something I consume for closure." He handed Maya the envelope, and the old ache returned without its former power. Alexander asked Eleanor to record a complete statement including the threats, hidden envelope, and silence. Eleanor agreed, although the confession would expose her to lawsuits and public condemnation. For the first time, all three stood inside the same truth without anyone controlling it. Richard later pleaded guilty to drug tampering, obstruction, fraud, and witness intimidation. The court imprisoned him and seized assets hidden through foundation accounts. The public archive dismantled his father's philanthropic mythology and identified families entitled to restitution. Hayes Global survived under independent oversight, smaller and less powerful but no longer dependent on secrecy. Eleanor testified publicly, then returned to the hospital resource room the next week. Maya did not call that redemption, but she recognized accountability continuing after humiliation. 1 year later, the hospital opened a learning garden designed by patients, teachers, nurses, and families. The entrance carried no donor's name, Only a line chosen by Caleb. Every child deserves a future larger than fear. The recovered girl read the dedication, then handed Maya a journal filled with children's messages. Alexander stood among volunteers, holding a box of books. When the ceremony ended, Maya found him beneath the maple tree, where the first fragment of truth had surfaced. She carried the sealed letter in one hand and the blue notebook in the other. "I read it this morning," she said, and Alexander waited without asking what it contained. Maya said the letter belonged to a frightened young woman who believed love could survive if truth arrived quickly enough. She placed it inside the hospital archive as evidence of what silence could cost. "Some things should not be destroyed just because they hurt," she said. "Sometimes pain becomes useful when it stops someone else from repeating it." Alexander asked what that meant for them, and Maya answered with the honesty neither had received 8 years earlier. She could not return to the love they lost, because nostalgia was not trust, and regret was not intimacy. What grew between them was built through witness choices, difficult conversations, and ordinary Tuesdays. She told him she was willing to begin there, without promises borrowed from younger versions of themselves. Alexander smiled with the relief of receiving something he could not purchase or control. He asked whether she would have dinner with him after her shift, and Maya said yes, before reminding him that she chose the restaurant. They returned as children opened books and Eleanor served lemonade beside parents who once knew only her surname. Nothing returned to its original shape, and no apology erased the stolen years. Truth had done something more honest than repair the past. It ended a lie chosen by someone else. Maya reached for Alexander's hand only after they had crossed half the path, and he held it without tightening his grip. Above them, pages turned in the afternoon breeze, carrying the quiet promise that a life could not be rewritten, but it could still be authored with greater courage from the next sentence forward.